start recording now. This session is being recorded. So if you do want to, ask those questions anonymously, please click on that button in the Q&A when you ask questions. And polling questions will be released during this presentation. And so in order to get CPE credits for this class, please answer the polling questions. And it doesn't matter whether or not you get the correct answer. If for any reason you cannot see the polling questions, please use the chat function to let us know. And then I see a few more questions in the chat again about the survey. So when the Zoom presentation at the end today is done, before you click out of the session, please check the chat function for a link to the survey. And so once you click on that link to the survey, there's going to be an option to pick which class you attended. So you can complete the survey for the internal control class if you attended this morning. And then if you attended this class, you can complete the survey for this class. So again, it'll be in the chat function of Zoom. Okay, so our session this morning is the CalPers session. And I want to welcome Mary Beth Redding. She is a senior actuarial consultant at Foster & Foster, which just recently acquired Bartell Associates effective July 1st. And so I will hand it over to Mary Beth to get started on her presentation and go over a little bit more about this change.
Okay, thank you, Whitney. Hopefully everything's coming through okay. Can you see the slides?
Yes, and I can see your notes.
Oops, really?
Too, so I don't know if, yeah, I think it has something to do with the setting. So if you want me to share the PowerPoint for you, I can do that. Or you can give it.
You do that?
Okay. Let me go to that.
I'll just have to tell you when to click.
Yes, definitely tell me. So I will slideshow. I don't know why it's kind of slowing down here. Huh. Now my PowerPoint doesn't want to work. Uh-oh. Let's see here. Okay, let me share. Okay, hopefully you can see it.
You're not presenting yet. You need to click the start slideshow.
Okay, can you see it now?
There you go. Yes.
Okay. And you can see not the notes, right?
Yep.
Okay, awesome.
We're in good shape. Thank you, Whitney.
No problem.
Sorry, everybody. I think that, after how long, 2 years of pandemic stuff, we would be experts at Zoom and sharing screens, but I guess we're not quite there yet. So I'd like to say good morning again to everybody. I'm really excited that so many people decided to attend this session on a Monday morning to hear about what's going on with CalPers. I hope you enjoy the session and hopefully even learn a few things. And as Whitney mentioned, we do have some news about Bartell Associates. We've been acquired by Foster & Foster Consulting Actuaries. They're another firm that specializes in providing actuarial consulting services to public agencies. So it's very much like Bartell Associates, but it'll give us a lot more resources to provide stuff to our clients. So we're really excited about it, but I have to apologize in advance. We have been notifying our clients kind of one by one individually and reaching out to them. And I know that there's some of you I haven't talked to yet. I've been away on vacation, so my apologies. But with that, all of my contact information at the moment is the same, and it's as printed on these slides, so you know where to reach me. And let's dive in. Next one. Okay, so we're going to talk about CalPers investment returns. We're going to talk about what that means for contributions, and then we're going to do something a little bit different and talk about healthcare and retiree healthcare costs. Okay, next. Thank you. Starting with one more click. Here we go. Oh, you want to click again? Okay,
No?
sorry. Yeah, go back. We'll watch the fireworks and we'll just think about where we were a year ago when CalPERS return was 21.3% for fiscal year 2021. And it was amazing, right? Remember how happy everyone was, and we thought that this was it. It was solving all of the problems for our pension plans, and we were so happy. Just try to keep that in your mind for the rest of the session, because that's not there anymore. Okay. But going back again to last year and trying to review, just so we get everything set in our head that happened between a year ago and now. When we measure the impact that great return for fiscal year 21 had, the way we do it is to calculate the difference between the discount rate that CalPERS assumes, so the expected return that they think they're going to get on assets, which was 7%, and then the actual return that they did get, which was 21.3%. You need to subtract out administrative expenses because their expected return is after administrative expenses. And right now they're taking that at about 10 basis points. It used to be 15. And then you apply that gain percentage to the plan assets. So if we calculate the impact of last year's good investment return, we take 21.3%, that the published return rate minus 10 basis points for administrative expenses. And we take the difference between that and the expected rate of 7%, and we get 14.2. So the extra amount of money that was earned by the plan assets in fiscal 21 was 14.2% of plan assets. And the important thing is to remember it applies to plan assets, not the unfunded liability. Plan assets are usually much, much bigger. So this has a huge impact. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so we're going to start out with a polling question, and it's an easy warm-up, hopefully, for you.
All right, it's been launched. So we'll give everyone a minute to answer the polling question. And again, if you don't see it, please put in the chat your name so we can make sure that we get you down for attendance.
Okay, so this is, as I said, just a warm up. Hopefully everybody will get this right. We're asking, which is a bigger number, 14% of your plan's assets or 14% of the unfunded liability? Can you tell if we've got all the answers, Whitney, or should we give it a little bit longer?
I see 90%. So, so I'll cut it off in about 10 seconds.
Okay, and I'm hoping we get 100% of the right answer.
I don't know. Okay, so I'm going to end the poll and share the results. So you can see the results on there.
Oh, okay, so the right answer was that almost all the time, as long as your plan is over 50% funded, 14% of your plan assets is a much bigger number than 14% of the unfunded liability. So it was a warm up. 2/3 of the people got it right.
Yep, warm up.
Okay. You want to click to the next slide with the,
yes,
just show the answer?
Yep.
Okay.
Should I go to the next one?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Okay, so what are the takeaways from the fiscal 21 return? First of all, 21% was a great return. Can you click again? But it wasn't, earth-shatteringly great. It's about what we call 85th percentile, meaning we expect returns to sort of randomly earn that much about 15% of the time, or about 1 year in 7. So it was good, but it was not super fantastic. That said, it was good, reduced costs, but there's a but. One more click. Comes the but, and the next slide. We had the funding risk mitigation policy. Okay, so again, if you go back, way back in time to 2015, CalPers introduced a funding risk mitigation policy to try to make pension costs be less risky, but it never, the triggers that were required for it to come into a play never ever happened until fiscal year 21. So in July of 21, so a year ago now, they announced that the policy was triggered, the discount rate would be lowered. Next slide, please. Okay, so the point of the risk mitigation policy is to reduce the discount rate, really because they are reducing the risk in the assets, reducing the asset volatility. So that's what the intention was. Okay. And in July of 2021, again, it happened for the first time, and they announced that the discount rate would drop to 6.8%. Okay, let's have a look at the next slide. So following that announcement, the next thing that happened last year was that we had CalPers board meetings in the fall, and they were part of CalPers's regularly scheduled review of the assets in the fund and the allocation of the fund and how they're invested and what they think those assets are going to earn. It was the normal 4-year cycle where that was coming up. So the first thing that the board did was set new capital market assumptions. So these are an assumption that says what they think each kind of asset they invest in is going to earn in the long run. And those were set according to what their investment advisors told them to be the expected return for each asset class, of course, but much lower than the rates that had been in effect earlier. And low enough that had CalPers kept the asset mix, the asset allocation they had previously, it would have been about 6.2% as a future return. Okay, so the board in November selected a new asset allocation for the PERF, for the fund, that coincidentally, or maybe not entirely so coincidentally, the asset mix they chose is expected to earn 6.8% in the future under those new capital market assumptions. Now, I told you that had they kept the old asset mix, that would have only earned 6.2%, but they've got one that they expect will earn 6.8. How did they do it? They had to make the asset mix more risky in order to get that now higher return. And if you remember, the whole point of the risk mitigation policy was to pull risk out of the fund, and in return for that, the discount rate would lower a little bit at a time. And so what we saw here was that the discount rate lowered, but actually the fund is riskier. So I want to, if you could click to the next slide, please, Whitney, I want to talk a little bit about risk, because I've been using that word over and over and over. And when we talk about risk, we mean variability, the fact that things go up and down and they're not stable. Okay, so here's a picture. It has two curves, or two squiggles, if you want to call them that. The blue one is much higher, has higher ups, higher downs, and we call that one more risky. And the green squiggle has little lower ups and downs, and that one would be called less risky. In this picture, the way I've drawn them, both of the curves, the blue curve and the green curve, have the same average number over time, you can kind of see a darker line down the middle, and that's the average. It's exactly the same for both curves. But if you asked people which would they rather have if this was some sort of money coming in, most people would choose the green curve, right? It's a lot less predictable. It's kind of boring, not a lot of ups and downs. But you know, when you're talking about money, excitement is not always what you want. Boring is good. So most people would choose the less risky green line. Okay, can we have the next slide? Okay, so investment theory says that the first picture I just showed you isn't the way things work for investments. The theory says that in the long run, investments that are more risky are going to have a higher average return. So in this picture, we've changed the curves a little bit. And if you look at the blue curve, you can see that on the down years, the down points, the blue curve is still farther down than the green, but in the good years where it's up, it's much higher up. And in fact, the average of the blue curve is now that horizontal blue line. It's higher than the average of the green curve, the green line. So what's happened here is that the blue curve is riskier, but if you chose that blue curve, you would be rewarded for it. Theoretically, you would have a higher return in the long run. Okay, so hopefully that helps make a little bit of sense for you. Investment theory says that if you have an investment that's riskier, hopefully in the long run, you're going to earn more with it. Okay, can you click, please, Whitney? Okay, so if we classify the kinds of investments that pension plans and other people use by risk, some of the ones that are always thought of as more risky are things like equities, which are stocks, private equities, private bonds, are much riskier investments, and things that are less risky are things like bonds and real estate. Cash, obviously, is sort of the prime example of something that's not very risky at all, but does not earn much at all either. Okay, next slide. Okay, we're going to put up the second polling question.
Yes, so I will release, I've launched poll number 2.
And while I'm going to talk about this, if I can get my notes back. I'm going to talk about this while you think about how to answer it, okay? So just to make this a little bit more real, instead of talking about investments, let's talk about your paycheck, okay? As you're answering this question. Would you like a paycheck that's pretty much the same amount every month? Or would you like one that would have unpredictable ups and downs? Sometimes it'll be 0, sometimes it'll be a really big number. You never know in advance which it's going to be. But over a year, if you take the unpredictable paycheck, you'll get more than if you chose the stable paycheck every month. So I'm just kind of curious, you personally, what would you choose? The very stable income with lower payments, or an unpredictable income that had a higher overall amount? And I probably should have put a third choice in the answer that said, depends on how much more you're going to give me, but I didn't tell you that, so you just have to answer anyways.
Okay, so I've ended the poll, and I don't know why it doesn't want to let, okay, sharing results. So you should see the results up.
Ah, interesting. Okay, so actuaries are notoriously risk averse, and it looks like this group is too, pretty much, where most of you would choose the very stable income, even if it's going to be lower overall. And I think, you know, that as we manage pension plans, I think that's what CalPers is aiming for, because they think that's what people want. They're willing to take a lower return in exchange for stability. But there are groups of people that we would see very different answers for on this question. Okay, let's go on ahead. Okay, so we need the next slide.
After this one?
No, sorry, that one.
This one, okay.
Perfect. Okay. So I told you that the new asset allocation that the board picked in the fall of 2021 was more risky in order to get the asset returns, the expected returns up to 6.8%. So what the takeaway from that is that we need to expect more year-to-year variability in the returns of those assets and in the funded status and also in your contributions. Okay. Interestingly enough, there was one statistic that CalPers gives in the board materials that's a sort of different take on measuring the riskiness of the plan assets. And what they calculate is how likely is the average plan over the next 20 to 30 years to have its funded status fall under 50%. So why would it fall under 50%? It would be because CalPers had a series of very bad investment returns, okay? And so the riskier the asset allocation is, the more likely it is that you'll come up with a series of bad returns. And so what they calculated in the board meeting is that the chance of the average plan at some point in the next 20 to 30 years dropping below 50% funded is now just over 20%. So it's up a fair amount from the previous. It says there's a 1 in 5 chance your plan could drop to less than 50% funded sometime in your lifetime. 50%, by the way, is not a magic number. It doesn't mean your plan is doomed if you hit 50%. It just means it's as plans funded status degrades, it gets harder and harder to get it back. It's more and more costly. So it's something you want to avoid. Okay, so we have the more risky asset portfolio. Let's talk a little bit about what that is on the next slide. Okay, so we have a list of all the different kinds of things that are in CalPERS investment portfolio. And the left-hand column that says current portfolio is what was there before the November board meeting. The new portfolio is what was there after the November board meeting, although it takes a long time for CalPERS to actually switch their portfolio. So it's not really clear. They're probably at some, intermediate state right now between the two. Can you click once for me, Whitney? Okay, let's look at all the things that increased in the percentage of the fund. You'll see that private debt, for example, there was none before, now it's 5% of the fund. Investment grade corporate bonds went up, and that's actually not that risky. Private equity went up a lot from 8 to 13% of the fund. And very interestingly, they added this category called leverage. It shows us -5%. And what that means is they're actually planning to borrow assets equal to 5% of the PERV, which is a lot of money, and invest that and planning to earn more by investing that borrowed money than they're paying to borrow it. So that, of course, is a risky thing. One more click. And then if you look at the things that reduced their assets, their allocation of the assets, treasuries went down from 10% to 5% of the fund, and they were also actually able to reduce global equities a little bit. So overall, the new portfolio is much riskier than the old portfolio. We expect a lot more variability. Okay, next slide.
Okay, another poll.
Polling.
So let me launch poll number 3. You should see poll number 3 in the Zoom.
I don't
It is
see
being
it.
slow for some reason.
There we go.
You see it? Okay, good.
Okay, so this one hopefully is another kind of gimme, but we'll see. We want to know what happens when the discount rate is lowered. So when we're doing actuarial calculations and the actuaries lower the discount rate, as when they went from 7% to 6.8%, what happens to the liabilities? Ooh.
Okay, I'll give 30 more seconds to answer.
I'm really excited. I think everyone's warmed up now. I didn't give them the answer to this in advance, but I think we'll get it right.
I think so. Okay, I'm going to end the poll and share the results.
Good job. Yes, when the discount rate is lowered, all the actuarial calculations are present value calculations. So when you have a lower discount rate, the present value goes up. So that's good job, guys.
Nice.
Okay.
Go to the next.
Okay, next one. Okay, so as you guys all told us, when we have a lower discount rate, it increases the present value, and it increases the present value of, we have a click? The actuarial accrued liability, so that's a measure of the present value of future benefits. And when that increases, the unfunded liability increases. The normal cost also increases because that's the present value of benefits that people are earning every single year. And then possibly the PEPRA member contributions might increase. For classics, we know your contribution rate is fixed in law. It's not going to change, unless the legislature does something, which it's unlikely. But PEPRA members contribution is always half of the value of benefits being earned in the year. And so when the discount rate goes down, the normal cost goes up, their share of the normal cost goes up, but we have these rounding rules. So the PEPRA member contribution might or might not go up. And in fact, when you get your new report from CalPers this summer, one of the things you want to look at very carefully is whether or not that PEPRA member rate is changing next year. Okay, next slide. Oh, sorry. There's one positive impact of the lower discount rate, and it's small, but we should mention it. If you think about the unfunded liability, we often compare it to a mortgage. You have a lot of layers of unfunded liability. You're paying them, each of them off like a mortgage over a specific period of time. If you refinance the mortgage at a lower interest rate, your payments would go down. And the very same thing happens to the UAL for the unfunded liability that was already existing. The payments go down a tiny bit. Okay, now we can go to the next slide. Okay, so this is a complicated slide. Apologies in advance. But I know that some folks, when you get your CalPers report, you love to go to the page full of numbers, the horizontal page that shows all of the amortization bases. And I called it a page, but these days it's mostly 2 pages because we have so many layers. And most years you'll see that the actuaries have added 2 or 3 amortization bases. Usually there's the investment gain or loss and the non-investment gain or loss. And sometimes there's assumption changes. What we think from the draft of the report we've seen, we think that when your reports come out this summer, you're going to see 5 amortization bases for 2021, and they're going to look, some of them are going to look very strange. So I wanted to take some time and go through what they'll look like. Okay, they won't look exactly like my slide here, but you should see 5 new amortization bases at the end of the list. And go ahead and click the first. Okay, so the first one is called assumption change. And this is because the CalPers board approved some actuarial assumption changes as a result of the experience study, things like pay increases for employees and when they retire, stuff like that. And it had a relatively small impact. It's getting funded over 20 years, and this is just sort of a normal amortization base. Okay, next one. Okay, the next one I want to talk about is the third one on the list, and it's called non-investment gain and loss. And that's typically small. It's what I call the stuff happens. Your people didn't behave exactly the way CalPers assumptions thought they were going to, and that difference is captured in a gain or loss. Again, typically small, it's funded over 20 years. Next. Okay, now we have the first of the very unusual amortization bases, and this one's labeled risk mitigation. What this is the amount that the actuarial liability increased because the discount rate changed from 7% to 6.8%. And it's a pretty big number. It'll be a pretty big number for most people. But interestingly, the amortization period is not 20 years, it's 1 year. Okay, so we're taking this amortization base. In this example, it's $10,000, $10,600. You don't actually make the payment on it in fiscal year 21-22 because that year is over. You don't make the payment until 23-24. So if you slide along the right on that row, you'll see that it's grown to be about $13,490 by 23-24 when you make the payment all at once to pay that off. Okay, so you might get a little stressed about this, but we have the next base, which is a risk mitigation offset. Never before seen in a CalPers actuarial report. And what they've done here is they've pulled out enough of the investment gain to exactly offset the risk mitigation. It doesn't look like they offset. Can you click one more, Whitney? But if you go way out to the time where you're making the payments, they've grown to be exactly the same number. They exactly offset each other. And so the fact that you're paying off the risk mitigation, that huge increase in the liability in 1 year, it's not a cost impact because that you've got this offset to it. Okay, next, we have the one we left till last, which is the investment gain for fiscal 21, remembering that was the really good year when CalPers earned 21%. So all the balances shown in this table, the balances at June 30th of 21, it's far and away the biggest number. One more click. Okay. And really, the amount of the investment gain was two pieces. It's the amount that shows as $34,000 in this row that's getting amortized to reduce your costs over the next 20 years, plus the $11,000 that they pulled out to be the risk mitigation offset. Okay, so those two pieces together are really what excess gain there was from your assets. Some of it's being used to offset the drop of the discount rate, about a quarter of it, and the remainder is there to reduce your costs going forward. Okay, want to go, whew, but we got through that. Okay, finally, we've set the table. We've talked all about fiscal 21, what to expect from everything that happened. Let's talk about 22. I looked again this morning. I don't think CalPers has published their returns yet for the current fiscal year, for fiscal 22. I'm expecting it in the next couple days, potentially during the board meeting. But for purposes of this session, let's just assume it's a -5%. I think it's going to be something in that ballpark. So really not very good. What does that mean? Okay, let's have the next slide. Okay, we've got a little, when Whitney releases this, we've got a little harder question that requires just a little bit of math for the last polling question.
Okay, so I launched it and I don't know why it keeps getting stuck, but you should see it soon.
Okay, here it is. I can see it. What is the investment gain or loss if CalPers assets earn -5% after administrative expenses in fiscal year 22? Is it a loss of 5% of your plan assets, 12% of your plan assets, 11.8% of your plan assets, or 5% of the unfunded liability? So it's math, but it's a really easy math. We'll see how everyone does.
I can tell the answers are slower than before, like people are thinking about it. So I'll give everyone.
It doesn't, yeah, everyone gets CPE credit, even if you get the wrong answer, right?
Yeah. Okay, I'll wait another 10 seconds or so for people to answer. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. And I will share results.
Oh, very good. Almost half the people got the right answer, which is 11.8%. So the way we get that is by saying the discount rate was 6.8 for this year. CalPERS expected 6.8, but they got a -5. So 6.8 plus 5 is 11.8% less than expected. Okay, but 40% of the people got it right, so that's great.
All right.
So what does that mean? Okay. And so let me stop and say, if you remember, we talked a lot about fiscal 21 and we calculated that the impact of the good investment return was about a 14% more assets than expected. But then of course, CalPERS took, some of that to offset the drop in the discount rate. But 11.8 and 14 are kind of the same. And in fact, if you look at a very rough impact of the fiscal year 2022 asset loss, it's going to pretty much move projected contributions back to where they were before the great return we had in 21. Kind of ate it up, wiped it out, and we're back to where we were. Okay, but not that much worse. Okay, next slide. So we'll show you a couple pictures. This is a curve. Don't worry that you can't read the numbers. The shape is really all that's important. The blue line shows projected contributions for an agency starting from 21-22. If the CalPERS assets had earned 7% in 2021 instead of the 21%, they'd earn 7% and then 6.8% this year, and then 6.8% kind of going on. We saw contributions were projected to rise for a while and then drop and then level out at their ultimate level. Okay, next slide. So in this slide, we added these green dots, and they show what the projected contribution was after the 21% return for fiscal 21. And you can see it's hugely lower. The contribution rate dropped over a 5-year period, then it came up again, sort of mirroring the blue line, and dropped down again to that ultimate rate. Okay, and then one more click. So now we put a green line on that's a little bit hard to see because it's sitting right next to that blue line, a little bit lower in the first years. And then if you look farther out, when we get almost down to the ultimate level, it's delayed a little bit. And that's showing what the projected contributions are now with a -21% return for positive 21% return for the fiscal year 21 and -5% for the current year. So all the good news from last year is gone, but it's not really worse. It's kind of back to where we started. Okay, next slide. Okay, so CalPERS, as I said, hasn't released their return for the year, but there is going to be, we think, something very interesting in the reports they published this summer that show you what might be a good estimate of the impact of the asset loss for the year. And they have this little table that says, what if we have a 2 standard deviation loss, which is -17%, or what if we have a 1 standard deviation loss, exactly where Whitney's pointing to, -5.2%. And that's about where we expect the CalPERS results for the year to come in. But if not, you can kind of compare these two things to show you. The first thing it shows you under the -5.2% return is the normal cost rate. And what you'll see there is that between fiscal 24 and fiscal 25, the normal cost rate actually goes down. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, CalPERS just had a big asset loss. Why is the normal cost rate going down? It's going down because Investment return doesn't affect normal cost, but what you're seeing is that as we add more and more Pepper people every year, the normal cost rate drops just a little bit. So that's what's going on there. But the bottom line with the UAL contribution, you'll see the number went up a lot. It went up from 5,000 to 5,700 in the first year. And that's what the impact of the -5% investment return is. What they kind of say in the CalPers report is that, yes, the fiscal 25 is the first year of the recognition of the asset loss in your contribution rates. And remember that the amortization of those is phased in over 5 years. So that increase from 4,966 to 5,739 is only 20% of the ultimate increase. And so you might wonder why they didn't give you a little schedule and show you the whole 5 years as it ramps up to the full amount. And what they said is, well, we've noticed that most of the time when you have a bad investment year, the year after that is a good investment year. And so then you'll have gains and you won't ever feel the full ramp up, which I thought was a little bit interesting. You want to show us the next slide, Whitney? It is true. So this green line is the year by year returns of CalPers, and you can see they go up and down. It is true that down years are often followed by up years, but it's also true that up years are often followed by down years. So anyways, I just thought that was a kind of interesting comment that CalPers put on their chart. And if you are trying to budget from it, remember that future years' impacts will be bigger. Okay, let's go on to the next slide. This is another thing I think is pretty important. The timing is very different between funding and GASB 68 reporting. Okay, so the first thing we have on the left is the timing of when 3 things first impact your contributions, even first impact on a phased-in rate. So the good fiscal 21 returns first appear in the 21 valuation, and they hit the 23-24 contributions. The 6.8% discount rate, which increases contributions a little bit, or would if it were not offset by the assets, also has the very same timing. It's first impacting the 23-24 contributions. Do you want to give us a click, Whitney, and just it'll circle those? Okay. The poor returns for fiscal 22 are first going to impact the 22 valuation and the 24-25 contributions. So they're a year later. So we get the first 2 things hitting 23-24 contributions, and then we get 24-25 where the contributions go back up. On the GASB 68 side, it's very different. Okay, for the current reporting for fiscal year end June 30th of 22, everything was measured at June 30th of 21, and the only thing that was there at June 30th of 21 was a good asset return for 21. The 6.8% discount rate, the way that GASB thinks about it, it's not what CalPers declares the discount rate to be for funding. The discount rate for GASB 68 is what do we expect assets to earn going forward. And that was determined in November when the board said, oh, as we look at it now with this new portfolio, it's going to earn 6.8%. So because the board made that decision in November, it's not recognized until the June 30th, 22 measurement date, which impacts your June 30th, 23 financial statements. And on the exact same timing as the lower discount rate, which increases liabilities, is the poor fiscal 22 investment return. One more click, please, Whitney, which will also be the June 30th, 23 financial statements. So what you'll see in your GASB 68 reporting is everything is going to look wonderful this year. You've got all the benefit of the good fiscal 21 return, none of the bad things. And then in next year's financial statements, you'll be hit with both of the bad things in 1 year. So you're going to see really good numbers this year and not so good numbers the year after. Okay, deep breath. I think we're good on time. I'm going to go through sort of totally changed topics and talk about retiree healthcare. Okay, unless there's any questions we need to address now.
There are 2 questions that have come
Okay.
in. Do you want me to go ahead and say what they are?
Sure.
Okay, so the first one was, can you explain why unfunded liability is usually lower than assets?
Okay. Let's just think about some numbers. Most CalPERS plans are funded, let's say 80% at this point, 70, 80%. So what that means is if I have $100 of liabilities of money I owe, probably I have, let's say, $75 of assets. So $100 of liability, $75 of assets means my plan is 75% funded, kind of ballpark average. The unfunded liability is 25. So my assets are 75, the unfunded is 25. The only way the unfunded could be bigger than the assets would be if your plan is really, really badly funded, way under 50%. You would have a bigger unfunded than assets. And we just don't see that in California. Hopefully that helped.
Yeah, no, I think it does. Okay, so given the volatile, this is another question. Given the volatile stock market, is it still worthy to prepay the fiscal year 22-23 UAL payment by the end of July to achieve interest savings, or are agencies better off to make monthly payments and forego the interest savings? As soon as a lump sum payment is made, the market value may decline.
So I should say that I can't give investment advice, and you don't want me to give investment advice. I would ask your investment advisor. But to me, I think it's always worthwhile to prepay because there'll be some years where you'll be kicking yourself, but overall, on the average, in most years, it should be a good deal.
Okay. And then there's one more question.
Okay.
Would the CalPERS scenario hold true for standalone retirement plans as well?
I'm not sure which CalPERS scenario the questioner is asking about. Maybe they could be re-ask it, and we'll come to it at the end.
Oh, okay, they said it has to do with the last slide. Oh, with this recognition timing, I'm assuming still hold true for standalone.
The recognition timing for the asset return should be the same, but that the deal about dropping the discount rate is very unique just to CalPERS.
Okay. And that's it.
Okay, great. We'll move on to healthcare and start with first slide that says everything I just talked about, how we expect lower future returns for CalPERS pension, also applies to the assets that are funding retiree healthcare plans. Click. Okay, and so talking about CalPERS, staying on that topic, in March of 22, the CalPERS board approved a new asset allocations for the SERP. They're slightly more aggressive, slightly more risky than they were before, but the SERP funds are much more plain vanilla. There's no private equity in them. There's no private debt. There's no leveraging. They're sort of ordinary categories that just changed a little bit. Next slide. Or sorry, next one. So depending on what your actuary was using as assumptions, CalPERS has published the expected returns of the 3 SERP categories they might be much lower than what you had seen in the past. CalPers is projecting strategy 1 to earn 6% long run, strategy 3, 5%. And if you're not funding with CalPers, if you're in, PARS or some other investment fund for retiree healthcare, you should expect your actuary to be coming back and telling you something similar, that we don't think assets are going to earn what they were before. Okay, so that means the discount rate drops, liabilities go up, just like for pension plans. And that's one big driver of your OPEB cost. But the second is healthcare costs. Next slide. Okay, so right now, today or tomorrow, CalPERS board is meeting, and one of the things that they are talking about is what our premiums going to be for next year. And the actuaries have actually been really excited to hear about this, because we've all been wondering when we're going to find out what COVID costs. And I don't know, maybe we're sort of morbid people, or but we wanted to see what was happening to premiums and if we could figure out what was going on from that. So I'm not sure we can, but CalPERS has released their preliminary premiums for healthcare for 2023. And I wanted to go over with you what they're doing and why you're getting a little bit odd results in these preliminary premiums that we really think the board is going to approve without much change in the current meetings. Okay, so if you could actually read the slide and you could read the percent changes in the right-hand column, these are all of the HMOs, pre-Medicare HMOs. You would see that there's a huge variation in the numbers. They go from like -7%, so a premium drop for some plans, to as much as a 30% increase. Overall, weighted average is about a 4% increase in premiums, which isn't too bad. Next slide, please. The Medicare Advantage plans, the same thing. Some of them, one of them in particular, is up about 15%. A lot of them have decreases, and overall weighted average for the Medicare Advantage plans is about a 3% premium drop for 2023. Last slide, next slide anyways. If you look at the PPOs, the story is very different. For the basic plans, the pre-Medicare plans, the PPOs are going to have about a 16% premium increase. And the Medicare supplement plans, the CalPERS, PERS, and PERS Gold and PERS Platinum, as we call them now, will have about a 10% increase. Overall, the program has about a 6.8% increase in premiums. Next slide. Okay, I'm going to have some bullets to click through. Okay, so what's driving these increases in healthcare costs? And it's kind of interesting, not all of what you might expect, but first is just healthcare costs, which are always increasing, as we know. Okay, next. COVID-19 costs. Again, the federal government paid for a lot of it, but there are some of the CalPERS plans that did have a lot of COVID costs in their numbers. Next. Risk mitigation is worth talking about. CalPERS is trying to get to the place where the premiums they charge for each plan reflects the benefits that are provided by that plan, rather than the actual costs incurred by the healthcare plan. It kind of doesn't make sense. Why are they doing this, right? They're trying to avoid something the actuaries called anti-selection. If you think about a situation where two plans are offered and one has a lower premium than the other, what you'll see is that healthier people who don't use a lot of healthcare, who don't care that the benefits maybe aren't that good in the cheap plan, will gravitate to the lower cost plan, leaving the less healthy people in the higher cost plan. That plan now doesn't have people helping keep the costs down. Its premium goes up, and more people leave to the lower cost plan. Its premium goes up, and you get into this very bad situation. So rather than looking at what the plans actually cost, CalPers is trying to adjust premiums to reflect the benefits that each plan offers. Next. Then there's something called snapback. They have a lot of interesting terms this year. But last year when CalPers was sending healthcare premiums, they used some of their reserves to artificially push down the premiums for some plans. And so now when you're comparing this year's premium costs, the first thing they did was let the premium rate snap back up to where it would have been without the artificial decrease last year. So it snaps back up, and then they apply all the other increases on top of it. And then the last thing we have is the premium surcharge. So since last year they spent down a lot of reserves trying to keep premiums down for a year, they now need to rebuild those reserves back up. And there's a surcharge on some of the PPO plans to help rebuild those reserves. Okay, next slide. I'm going to try to go through these quickly, and I'll just talk about the first one and we'll skip some of the others. I found this really fascinating. If you look, and this is in the board material from CalPers, if you looked at all the plans I went through really quickly and didn't let you read, the plan with the biggest increase year to year was Health Net Saludimas. And they had almost a 30% increase. So you might say, man, that plan is full of really unhealthy people with huge healthcare costs. And it turns out that wasn't what was going on at all. And so this slide goes through and says, why did they get a 30% premium increase? Well, their medical costs went up about 5%. Pharmacy was actually down. They have this other category, it was a little bit down. The snapback popped up the premium rate 8.5%. So it was artificially depressed last year, snapped back up to where it would have been, an increase of 8.5%. And then it turns out that this plan actually has among the healthiest people in the whole CalPers system. Because of that, they're not spending a lot of money, claims are low, but CalPers wants to price this according to the benefits it's actually providing. And so to do that, they increased the premium rate 17%. And so if you add all those two together, they end up with a 30% premium increase. So Whitney, we can skip the next two slides. I think I put in a couple of examples of other plans where you have different patterns of why the premiums are going up. And it's really a mixture of healthcare costs, the snapback, for PPO plans, the reserves. So if I'm trying to ask myself, what are these premiums that CalPers has come up with for 2023? Are they really a significant increase or not? I wanted to start by looking at the pattern of increases over time. And again, just look at the picture here. Don't focus on the numbers. These are 5 of the most popular plans CalPers has. The 3 on the left are pre-Medicare plans. And what you can see, these are the dollar amounts of premiums going from 2001 to 2022. And for each of the plans, they're a little bit different, but you see a very solid year-over-year increasing pattern in the costs, a little bit less so in Kaiser, which had a period of flat premiums not too long ago. The 2 plans on the right are Medicare plans, Kaiser Senior Advantage and PERS Care Platinum. Those premiums have been much more stable over time, very flat, especially recently. And when we think about healthcare costs, particularly in the OPEB world, typically about 2/3 of your OPEB costs are coming from Medicare plans, people eligible for Medicare. So the fact that those premiums were very flat has helped everybody's OPEB costs in the past years. Okay, but this still doesn't really tell me too much about what's happening in 2023. Can you click to the next slide? This one's a lot busier. What I tried to do was show you the change in medical costs every year. And what I do when I look at this is I find the 10% line and the 5% line, which is halfway between 0 and 10, and kind of say to myself, how often in the past few years, especially, has the increase in premiums been over 5% or over 10%? You see a lot of big increases at the beginning of time, but lately, if you look at Kaiser, it's like 5% a lot of years. The Medicare plans are running sort of in the 5% years. The PERS choice is running a lot higher than that, particularly in the most recent years. Can I have one more click, please? And that's really consistent with what is being proposed for 2023 increases. The Blue Shield plan probably will have a decrease. Kaiser increase similar to recent years, but the CalPers plans, the PERS choice, PERS care plans will likely see significant increases in premiums. And again, fairly consistent, at least for the pre-Medicare plan with what we've seen before. Okay, next slide. Okay, so where do we see healthcare costs going in the future? We see them increasing, especially in the next sort of 3 to 4 years. Next. Reasons COVID. We don't think we've seen all the COVID costs yet. It's still around. There are people still suffering from COVID. We think the federal government is picking up less of their costs. Next. Medical cost increases in general. Just like everybody else, there are supply chain issues that affect your doctors and your hospital and are driving up costs. And then lastly, we have labor costs. I think everyone read tons in the newspaper during COVID about nurses in particular, how hard it was to get qualified nurses and all the amount of money that people were spending on traveling nurses. I expect a lot of increase in labor costs going forward. And that, of course, drives up healthcare costs. So we see this continuing in the next few years. And what that means is, yes, indeed, your costs for active employee healthcare will go up, but so likely will your OPEB costs. Okay, next slide. And the next one, what do we think overall? So I started out this presentation by asking, is everything at CalPers doom and gloom? The bad investment results from 2022 are definitely going to wipe out all the 21 good returns. We have a lower discount rate that increased liabilities. We have a riskier asset portfolio. And we have increasing healthcare costs. So it doesn't look that good, does it? Next slide. What do I think? I think that this is just, I've sort of the theme of today is variability and risk are to be expected. And there's more and more of them in the future. More and more risk and variability going on. I think we're just seeing an example of that, an example where things went badly in several sectors all at once, but that's not, in the big picture, that's something we're going to see a lot of going forward. There's really no way for CalPers to get that variability, get rid of the variability without greatly increasing the costs, So all you can do is know that it's going to happen. Be ready for it, plan for significant changes, try to do as much forecasting as you can. And I think most importantly, communicate to all your stakeholders that when you have a good year, that's great, but next year may not be good. And we had a bad year, next year likely will not also be bad. Could be, but no guarantee, just a lot more variability and they have to get used to it and plan for it. So that's the end of my presentation. I'd be happy to answer more questions or hear what you think.
Okay, so I'm checking the Q&A. I don't see any new questions.
Whoa, everyone totally understands healthcare costs.
Looks like. And there's no questions in the chat.
Okay, well,
I see.
I guess.
So.
That's always reflective, Mary Beth, of the packed full of information in your slides and your speaking is.
If either that or everyone's so overwhelmed they can't figure out how to come up with a question.
They're still trying to figure out that math problem.
Well, I guess that means we have 5 extra minutes for everyone to figure out how to find the survey, right?
Yeah, so let's talk about a couple of housekeeping items again. So Stephanie has posted the link to the survey. So again, you'll see it in the chat, and just make sure to fill it out for the class that you attended. So if you attended this morning's internal control class, you can fill out the survey for that. And then you need to fill out another survey for attending this CalPers class. And you should just make sure that you submit both. So again, look in the chat for the link from Stephanie. And then other than that, thank you so much, Mary Beth.
Oh, you're welcome. I think I say this every year now. I'm hoping we'll do this in person once again, but it is always fun. Thank you.
Yeah, we're hoping to next year. I mean, we said that last year, but I think really for real this time next year, we're hoping to have an in-person event. Because I agree, it's a lot more interactive, and people get to catch up, which is cool.
Yeah.
So, and Mary Beth is in Europe. I just had to share that since we have extra time. So she so graciously came today to present on the last days of her Europe trip. So thank you so much.
You're welcome. I'm in Stockholm, and it's